All right. Thank you. Welcome back. Thanks for the great questions and your enthusiasm for the first session. So now we're going to get on to the next session, which is a live taping of a podcast. So I'm Scott Clavena. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Postscript Media. Stephen Lacey, my co-founder, sends his love and regards. He couldn't make it. He's sick. So I'm here to usher in our first live recording of a Postscript Media podcast. So we're super excited for this. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about Postscript and then about Climavores. Postscript Media, Stephen Lacey and I were at Green Tech Media. We spent a lot of time covering the energy transition for years and years. And along the way, fell in love with audio and podcasting. And then last year started our company, Postscript Media. And it provides services to partners in podcast production, but it also does originals. And I think the originals is what I want to talk about here is after many years covering the energy transition, we really thought about how to take that beyond just the industry and to everyone, because we believe, and I think all of you know this, that climate is an everything story. And it's not just about how the electricity grid is going to become clean or how energy sources are going to transition to renewables. It's about how all of our decisions, every industry, everything we do every day has an impact on the climate, and we're all a part of it. And as individuals, and we're all a part of it, is how we interact with systems and policies and politics. And how do you tell stories? How do you engage people on all of those levels? And so we've got 4 or 5 new podcasts that we want to talk about here, and then we're going to have a live taping of Climavores. The 5 we've got, and sort of the origin story of those is 2 with Canary Media, our partners. And again, thank you to Nick and Canary Media for having us here. Really appreciate the venue to have this. So big shout out to them. And 2 we do with Canary are The Carbon Copy. That's a weekly news magazine on issues in and events developing around how climate change is impacting the economy and culture. And then Catalyst with Shail Khan, a brilliant analyst and now venture capitalist, and he runs a great weekly interview podcast talking to really smart people about technology, markets, and innovations in the climate tech economy. And then the next thing we wanted to do in our originals is a little different from that, from the tech, to just say, what is it that we do every day that interacts with this changing planet? And you can think about it in some ways as like when you get up in the morning, you make decisions within an hour every day. And those decisions are, what am I going to wear? What am I going to eat? And how am I going to get to where I'm going? And so 3 of the podcasts that we've launched this summer are Hot Buttons, about the sustainable fashion industry; Climavores, about what we eat and how to feed the planet without frying the planet, as Mike likes to say. And Mode Shift is about how transit and how we get around in cities, how that's evolving to accept and acknowledge the constraints of climate change, the challenges around that, and how we can do a better job of commuting and getting around in cities as the planet changes. And so that brings us to Climavores. We get up every day. We make decisions about what we're going to eat. And I've had such a great time helping produce this podcast, not just because I love Mike and Tamar and the real enthusiasm and joy they bring to the research and the conversations they have, but how much I learn along the way. I mean, Mike and Tamar do something that really is like represents the power of podcasting. They have the time to talk through the research, to challenge our notions about, or our preconceived notions about the food industry, about the food we eat, the choices we make, some of the things we take for granted, some of the things we thought were helping the climate but may not be, and other ones that we may just not know, decisions we can make that can be really powerful. And so it's been a great honor to work with them, and the learning along the way has been a lot of fun. And I found that the same with our other podcast, Hot Buttons, on the fashion industry. we buy clothes, we think about fashion as like what represents our identity and what do we like, and but there's a lot that's going on behind the scenes in the fashion industry that has a tremendous impact on the climate and on the environment that needs fixing. And again, I've learned a ton. I've enjoyed it. Our hosts are just tremendously fun, engaging people, and that's what makes this job fun. And I hope you guys check the podcast out, because I think you learn and laugh and really enjoy that time each week with them. So now we will have our live taping of Climavores. And so what they're going to do, Tamar Haspel and Mike Grunwald, is we thought, why don't we look at a plate of food? And the ideal plate to look at is the USDA's My Plate that you can find on myplate.gov. And it sort of represents the optimal, in their minds, the optimal healthy distribution of the different food groups that we should be eating. And it informs decisions in schools. It informs decisions individually around the country. And so we thought we'd look at that plate and look at it through a climate lens. And we've done that bit by bit over the last 16 episodes of the podcast, but we're going to give you the highlights and talk through that in an enlightening way, as they have, and then we'll take your questions after that. All right, so this is a live taping of a podcast. So one of the things I've learned as a producer is before you start, you got to have room tone. So what that means is for about 10 or 15 seconds, we have to be really quiet. So let's start with room tone. So nobody say anything for 10 minutes. The engineers love this. They get the background sound. So let's try that. 10 seconds of silence. Perfect. And then applause for Mike Grunwald and Tamar Haspel of Climavores.
So 10 seconds of not talking is like the hardest thing we do.
It's a first time for everything. Well, we do want to start with a few thank yous, because starting with Scott and Stephen and the entire Postscript team, we've just been incredible.
Very much so.
Yeah, and the Canary folks also. Just incredible. I'm lucky enough to be associated with both, because they're mostly an energy team. I'm the one outlier. I write a food and climate column for Canary, and it's been a joy working with them. And they just kill it every day.
There's nothing like a professional.
Yeah, exactly. But then again, thanks to all of you for coming. We're so fired up to be here in New York City. Tamar's living in the Cape. I'm living in Miami. My wife and my daughter are literally at a Pitbull concert tonight. Mr. 305.
My chickens are fending for themselves.
Exactly. But we both have a lot of New York roots.
I think we still both have a Metro card.
Exactly. So let's start. I mean, Tamar is the nutrition guru of the two of us. I just take my cue from her on that stuff. And I know you have some strong feelings about it. They haven't put it up yet.
Oh, yeah,
but
we need our My Plate. Give us our My Plate.
The My Plate is something that you're a huge fan of.
All right. Well, now that the energy people have gone, we're going to get this party started. And every good party starts with My Plate. So we're supposed to have a slide of it, but since we don't, I'll just describe it. So it's a plate, and this was the sum total of what the United States government worked on for many years, since the 80s, about telling people what to eat and how much of it to eat. And we could have a whole nother episode about what was good about that and what wasn't good about that. And if you follow the space, you probably know a little bit about that. But it sort of culminated in a super simple graphic of a plate that has 4 quadrants: fruits, fruits, vegetables, grains, and proteins. And let's start, though, with that little circle of dairy. Dairy's a little bit of an outlier. And it's also, in all kinds of ways, I think it's a legacy category. Primarily, it's the legacy of the dairy lobby. And one of the reasons that dairy has been a part of the guidelines since the guidelines began in the 80s, and my friend Marian Nessel, who was part of that, is in the room today, so I can't say anything wrong, and was that dairy farmers lobbied hard to have it be a part of it. And the truth is that nobody actually needs dairy, although there was a time when dairy was super important for kids, particularly because children need more protein and more fat than adults, and it made sense for kids to drink milk.
I hope that was when I was a kid, because my parents are here too, and they made me drink a glass of milk with every meal until I was, I guess, 18, probably.
Do you still?
Only when I'm home.
You came out all right.
Yeah.
So I guess it's not that bad.
I don't know. Imagine how good I'd be otherwise.
And that's right. We don't have the counterfactual. And so dairy was important at one point. It was a relatively simple, affordable way for kids to get some of the nutrients they need. But the world has changed, and there aren't very many nutrients that Americans aren't getting enough of. And we're talking about, when we talk about all this, a lot of the nutrition stuff, we're talking about America. We're talking about the developed world, because the situation is obviously very different in the developing world, and we'll talk about that more when we get to some of the other sections. But dairy isn't necessary. And don't get me wrong, it's delicious. Scott talked about, the first decisions you make when you wake up, and mine is to put heavy cream in my coffee. And I'm not really ready to live in a cheeseless world. And dairy is delicious. And through all of this conversation, I don't want to forget that that's an important part of food. Food is joy. Food is deliciousness. Food is more than just its climate impact, but we have to talk about its climate impact.
Yeah, and dairy is it's a problem, unfortunately.
Yes, it is.
Because, pizza's great. And this is a little bit of a spoiler for everything we're going to talk about tonight. And kind of, if you haven't heard our podcast, we talk about this all the time. But the real problem is that cows suck. Cows are a disaster from a climate perspective, from an environmental perspective, really, but particularly from a climate perspective. You've, I'm sure, heard about the burping and farting of methane, which is a real problem. Their manure has all kinds of nitrous oxide, which is another really powerful greenhouse gas. But the main problem with cows, and we talk about this constantly, but it is land. The earth is becoming a cattle pasture. It's funny, right now we're in New York City, so it just feels like this is the world. We're surrounded by people, we're surrounded by buildings. If you take cities like New York and Manila and Beijing and all the sprawl and all the suburbs and the highways and driveways all over the world, the human footprint on the land, that's about 1% of the earth.
We're a rounding error.
Yeah, exactly. The rest of it is pretty much split half and half between agriculture and nature. The nature is almost entirely forests, and the agriculture is now 75-80% either pastures or grain that they're feeding to cows and other livestock. So the more farms we have, the less nature we have. and when we get rid of nature, when we deforest, when we burn it down, when we cut it down, that's a carbon bomb.
And even when we plow it up.
Exactly. It's and this is the reason that cows, and I think you'll get to see some charts later, but beef is Again, spoiler alert.
Hey, we haven't gotten to the proteins
Yeah.
part
well,
yet.
Well, beef is like the disaster. It's it's by far the worst food you can eat. But dairy is way up there. It's even worse than chicken and pork, and that's pretty amazing when you think that an entire chicken's life, it only makes one serving. It only makes chicken once. A pig's life, they make pork once. Cows are making dairy all the time, and it's still just a huge suck on our land, on our water, on our they're creating all kinds of environmental. Their poop is the huge. If you see these algal blooms, a lot of it is because of cows. So we're a broken record about this.
And there are two major issues with cows. And one of them, I think, is really accessible and approachable and obvious. They burp methane. They're ruminants, they eat grass, and a byproduct of their digestion is methane. And that's really easy. And to be fair, there are things that people are working on to make sure that they burp a little less methane, and that's really important. And we're enthusiastic about feed additives that are made from seaweed. But the thing that Mike was saying about the land use is just as important, if not more important, and it's a lot harder to grasp. And this is the conversation that I end up having with people all the time, because you sort of feel like, okay, well, if I'm buying beef from my local guy and they're doing everything right, then how can my beef affect land use in the Amazon? Because I'm buying American beef. But this is a global thing. And if we have a world that's basically half agriculture and half stuff we need to protect from agriculture, every steak you eat, every glass of milk you drink adds to the global demand, which is going to push us over into this 50% that we're trying to protect. It's not intuitive, but it's super important.
And if as long as we're already pissing people off,
That's our specialty.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the people are already thinking, oh yeah, but what if what if you mentioned, your local farm that's doing it right? Well, the big, nasty, massive industrial dairy, from a climate perspective, is probably doing it better. If the more land it takes to raise a cow, the more basically the more emissions you're getting per calorie. And
it's one of the conundrums of animal products and their climate impact, because sometimes the most efficient processes are the best for the climate, but the worst for animal welfare.
That's right. And now we may be. I mean, one thing before we we're kind of sneaking towards.
I know
towards protein, I think. But before, I think one thing we should say about dairy that's really exciting is that there actually is an alternative that people like.
It's true, and it's one of the places where there's been. In fact, it's probably one of the only places where there's been real progress in replacing a food that's not climate friendly with a food that's more climate friendly. But all you have to do is say oat milk on Twitter and all hell breaks loose.
Right. No, it is true. But in the United States, 15% of all milk consumption is now plant-based milk. We did an episode. It was got plant-based milk, and
it's one of the most obvious things, because if you look at any metric of these plant-based milks, even you've probably heard that almonds use all this water, which is true, but there's still a better option, a way better option.
Right.
Hey, Mike, what's the one thing that
right.
uses more water than almond milk?
Cows.
Yeah.
and it's just, again, from an environmental perspective, it is not close. Cows are such a disaster. And when you think about it, it makes sense that, sort of drinking plants directly as opposed to drinking stuff that's been, basically plants filtered through an animal that, had to, they ate those plants, but they had to make a snout, and they had to make a tail. They had to
poop, lots of poop.
They have to stay alive. They have to have a respiratory system. All that energy that's being poured into stuff that isn't milk or meat it's extremely inefficient. While plant-based milk, one of the things that's people criticize about it is that it's, in many ways it's kind of empty. It's empty. It's just
oats
water.
and water.
Right. But great. If it fills you up and without destroying the planet, that's fantastic. And we did one to sort of cut to the what everybody asks is, okay, but of soy milk, almond milk, oat milk, which should we drink if we shouldn't be drinking dairy milk? And the answer is whichever one you like. They're all so much better than cow milk that if you find one that you can actually replace your cow consumption, you're ahead of the game.
And people will make the case, and they're correct, that dairy milk has nutrients that those don't have. It has protein that those don't have. It has a higher fat content, which some people think is a good thing. But we in America are overnourished. So having a
We have
substitute,
plenty of fat, I've noticed.
I have my own personal store. So having less of those things, especially less protein, has been the darling of the nutrition community. But how many of us have taken another slice of cheese and told ourselves, oh, protein. And so in a world of overabundance, in a place where people are generally overfed, having something that is less nutritious but more climate friendly is a good bargain. Or so says me. So says Mike also, by the way.
So I think we should do some protein.
Oh, let's do protein, because we've already started on cows, so we're halfway there already.
Exactly.
So,
exactly. And
so Mike can talk about cows for a very long time.
yeah, we're both kind of cow bores.
Yeah, we are.
But you did mention that there has that one way that we've improved our climate impact of our food is by switching from cow milk to other milks, and really hopefully that trend will continue. Alternative milk has been around now for 30 years, almost 40. Another way that we really have made a huge climate difference, I wrote about this in Canary, is that there's been a dramatic shift from beef consumption to chicken consumption.
Right.
In the developed world. The world is eating much more meat, and as we hit 10 billion people on Earth, we are going to eat even more meat. As people in China and India, the first thing people do when they leave poverty, which is great, is they start eating more meat, and that's, from a climate perspective, not so great. It's great because meat is delicious, and it is in some ways.
And again,
nutritious.
in the developing world, there are still places where people get insufficient protein. There are still places where there's child stunting, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the kinds of quantities of meat we eat in the United States and the developed world. And I want to talk about pigs and chickens. But before I do that, I want to address this issue of regenerative grazing.
Oh yeah.
Because
my burger's okay. It's grass fed.
Right. So grass fed is this
No.
get out of climate impact free card, and it's such a dicey issue because it's absolutely true that you can graze cattle in ways that can sequester some carbon. It's even true that in some particular circumstances, no, it's totally true.
Mostly true.
All right, it's true.
It's hard to document.
So, but you can even graze them such that they will sequester enough carbon to outweigh their enteric methane, the methane that they burp. But there is no way that we can graze cattle to outweigh the land use problem. And right now, carbon neutral beef is magical thinking. And if you're getting grass-fed beef and you're thinking that's a better choice than other beef, it's probably not, because most of the grass-fed beef in the United States is not grazed in that way. It's grazed in ways that are possibly, usually not regenerative, but possibly even destructive.
And if it's regenerative, it's probably worse from a carbon perspective because they're probably putting fewer cows on that land,
Right.
which means
They
they need
undoubtedly
more
are.
land to make the same amount of cows, which means some of it's coming out of the Amazon again.
And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you want Mike and me at your next dinner party because we are a real hit.
That's bad. That's bad. You can eat that.
And we're math geeks. And so much of climate impact of food is math. And people want the picture of the cattle regenerating the pasture. That's so much more appealing than the damn math. But the damn math matters, and I guess that's why we're employed.
Right, and there really is. I mean, you hear a lot about this idea that it's this kind of land sharing idea that it's like, okay, we can have, yeah, sure, half the world is an animal farm, but that's okay because what is it? 4 per thousand is the name of the big kind of regenerative ag movement. And because their idea is if you just increased soil carbon on agricultural lands by 0.4%, basically you'd solve the entire climate problem. But it's like one of those things that said, like, if we just had lots of money in this bank vault, we'd be very, very rich. But nobody has really explained how we're going to get that money in there. And nobody has really shown that you can store a lot of carbon in that soil. As we'll talk about later, we know how to store carbon in a forest. We know how to store carbon in a tree. But the main way you store more carbon in a piece of agricultural soil is either you convert it from cropland to pasture, and then you got to grow some crops somewhere else, and probably the Amazon, or you're going to have to put more manure on it, which is fine, but where'd you get the manure from? So again, it's a lot of this robbing Peter to pay Paul, when the fact is, animal agriculture is really inefficient, and when it comes to the cows, which at least get a little bit more free reign and are, they're not in a cage or a crate like chickens or pigs, but they're just not good from a climate.
Now that we've driven a stake through the heart of grass-fed cows, let's move on to pigs. So much of the climate advice is eat less meat, and that's true. But there's a huge difference between chicken and pork, which are about the same. Chicken is a little bit better than pork from a climate standpoint, and beef. So the impact of pork is something on the range of 10% of the impact of beef. So if you want to cut down on your climate impact, and switching from beef to pork is a great way to do it. You don't have to go all the way to lentils, but we will talk about that. And so
Tamar likes lentils. It's a
yeah,
theme in the show also.
It's my thing. I know, I need a more exciting thing. But I've been writing I've been writing about food too long. So pigs and chickens are way better at turning feed into meat than cows are. They grow a lot faster. So if you take your average pig, so pigs, for starters, are really fertile. So a sow can have over 20 piglets in a year. She can have more than 1 litter, whereas a cow can have 1 calf. So if you're looking at climate impact, the climate impact of the steer that you eat has to include an entire year of the mother's life, because that's the only way to account for it.
Right, and a year of burping and farting
Right.
and eating and pooping. Yeah.
And bad cow, bad.
Yeah.
And
Moo.
whereas a pig, first of all, is one of 20 plus piglets that sow can have in a year. So you only have 1/20th of the life of the sow. But also a pig, and people are surprised by this, a pig reaches market weight, which is about 260 pounds, in 6 months. They are growing machines. Now, my husband and I have raised pigs a couple of times, and you can read all about it in my book, which you should buy. And
To Boldly Grow. It's really great. It's
thank
funny.
you very much. And they grow astonishingly quickly. You know, they're also smart and personable, and this idea that we raise them for food it grates it because it's like raising your dog for food. And so there are serious animal welfare concerns.
Especially since one of the reasons that they grow so fast. I mean, you look at chickens, which grow even faster, right?
Yeah,
they get to their, slaughter weight in 6 weeks, and they're so top heavy and fat that they can't even, they're often breaking their legs because they can't stand. It's kind of gross.
And this is one of the reasons that if you're choosing from a pure climate impact, chicken versus pork, chicken is a little better.
It's
but
efficient.
I think the pig is the ultimate eating animal because, first of all, you get a lot of meat for one life taken. And that doesn't really factor in to the equation too often. And of course, it's hard to factor in. How do you compare that with climate impact? And you can't, but I think it matters a lot. But I think that pigs in this country and the way they're raised raises serious questions about animal welfare. And my vision of the food supply as, my food supply, lentils and well-raised pork. And I think that it's possible to raise pigs in a way that is...
That's going to be a really crappy dinner party.
I know. They're going to run us out of New York on a rail here. You haven't had my lentil soup. It's pretty damn good, and it has lentils and well-raised pork. And yeah, the motto in our house, we eat a lot of legumes, but we always say everything's better with preserved pork products. So a little ham, a little sausage, a little bacon makes lentils delicious. But I digress. So I think that it's possible to raise and slaughter pigs in a way that is humane. And I think we can do it in a way that still keeps meat affordable. So for me, pigs are where the action is. You can often buy well-raised pork from places like Nyman Ranch or places that may be closer to home for you. And so if you're looking for meat with less climate impact and decent animal welfare standards, well-raised pork is where it's at.
Well, fake meat's better.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
And that, I think, is, unfortunately, it has not caught on the way fake milk has. For all the hype over Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, there's still less than 1% of the meat market, which is really disappointing. I think Impossible is really pretty good because they use soy to foreshadow something we're going to talk about a little bit. Beyond Meat, which still uses pea proteins, which is sort of notoriously you need to mask it because it has taste problems. I think it's not quite there yet, but and it's a real problem because I really think ultimately there's going to have to be a lot of alternative protein consumption if we're going to solve these massive problems. Right now, we're on track to deforest another 2 Indias worth of land by 2050. And that essentially is game over for the Amazon, game over for the climate.
And so the math on plant-based meat versus actual meat is just as clear as the math on plant-based dairy versus actual dairy.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of jumping through hoops on these things where people say, well, we don't know what this really looks like at scale. We only have the numbers that the companies have released. And those things are true, but the gap is so big that it's like 90 or 95% less the environmental footprint of these things. But it's problematic because, as Mike said, they're not quite there on taste yet for a while. Okay, let me ask. We need some audience participation here. How many of you went out to try the Impossible Whopper or some plant-based Whopper someplace? Okay.
Yeah, everybody, pretty much.
All right. Now, how many bought some and cooked it at home? Okay, we've got a bunch still. That's good. You're right.
How many gave up their the alternatives, right? It's like, unfortunately, meat is delicious, and we've been, our ancestors have been eating it for 2 million years, and so they've really got to nail it. And
It's a mature technology.
Yeah, exactly. I'm always saying that, it'll get better. Remember, alternative dairy has been around now for decades, and it's doing okay. Beyond Meat started in 2009, didn't have its first product until 2012. Impossible didn't have its first product till 2016. I mean, this stuff is brand new, but, Tesla came out and people immediately were like, okay, that's awesome. It's got to get cheaper, but it's awesome. And it kind of gave electric vehicles the kind of good name that I think it's going to need to become really mainstream. I'm worried about alternative meats because you only get one chance to make a first impression, and I think it was okay.
I agree, and I think that there's another problem with them that has already manifested and is going to continue to be a problem, and that is if you do the Venn diagram. I have a microphone, so I have to do it this way. If you do the Venn diagram between people who care about the climate impact of their food and people who are suspicious of highly processed food, you have almost complete overlap. And so this food that is addressing specifically a climate problem is being viewed with suspicion by the very people it should appeal to. And I think that's been an issue for it for a long time. Right. And so
we shouldn't be, right? Because we did
a whole episode.
We did an episode about processed food, and the sort of the too long don't listen is like, yeah, there's a lot of crappy, highly processed food. Yeah, fake meat is highly processed, but that's not really.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that fake meat is bad, and in fact, fake meat is about as nutritious as the real meat.
All right, so this is like the 15-second version, all right, maybe 30-second version of what we did in the podcast. So the thing about food processing, is processed food at the root of obesity and disease? I happen to think it is. But that's because food manufacturers, since the dawn of food processing, have been using processing to sell you crap. And so all of the processed food that's out there has been processed to taste better, to be calorie dense because that's what we like, to have salt and sugar and fat because that's what sells food. So this food has been processed with the goal of selling you stuff that you will buy. And it's going to be cheap, it's going to be convenient, it's going to be specifically engineered to be overeaten. That's Doritos' reason for being. And no, it's true, it's absolutely true. And there are very few processed foods whose reason for being is righteous. And in the case of fake meat, that is the case. If you talk to the people who are running these companies, and both Mike and I have been able to do that, they are true believers. They want to have a substitute so people eat less meat because they're trying to save the planet. So when you look at processed food and is it icky and do you want to eat it because it's highly processed, you have to think about why it was formulated in the first place. There's no reason to think that the ingredients in processed meat are bad for you.
Yeah, this is something we argue about. I don't think really the motives matter that much, but the product is just not, it has, most of the fake burgers have a little bit more sodium, but they have no cholesterol. They seem to be pretty much a wash, because they're soy or they're peas. And that kind of leads to the other three parts of my plate, right? Because
right.
because one, so much of the climate problem is meat and dairy. It just really is.
And we're not going to talk about cows anymore. At least I'm not. I can't promise for Mike.
Yeah, exactly. Why would you pin me down like that?
Sorry, friend. So the rest of the plate is plants. And this is the thing that I think is good about my plate. And you can talk about the things that are bad about my plate. But the thing that's good about my plate, it's that it's trying to be some graphic representative of like what your plate should look like, and most of it is plants, and I think that's reasonable. But all plants are not created equal. And so we have three categories. We have vegetables, we have grains, and we have fruits. And they're all fine, but vegetables are less fine. And I know this is like,
Don't
it's
get her
amazing.
started
I
on
know.
salad.
I know. It's astonishing that I have any friends at all. So vegetables are a luxury food, and their climate impact is higher than any of the, I see your face. And their climate impact is higher than that of any other plant food. But in some ways it doesn't really matter, because just like the people are a rounding error on the land use of the earth, vegetables are a rounding error in our food system and its climate impact. We have in the United States 400 million acres of crops, and the percent devoted to vegetables is, shout it out if you know it. That's my husband, he knows. I actually have a husband. It is 1%. And so, and this kind of blows people's minds, because we've been given this vision of the kind of agriculture that's better. Like the corn and soy, that's the bad agriculture. And the small farm that's growing rotations of vegetables, preferably locally, that's the good agriculture. It's totally not. Vegetables are some of the most resource-intensive crops we grow. They have much higher pesticide and fertilizer loads than any of the other plants that we're going to be talking about, except for pesticides on fruits also. And they're expensive, not because they haven't been subsidized, but because growing them is inherently expensive. And if you don't believe me, not that anyone would not believe me, if you don't believe me, go check out some of like the UC Davis case studies of raising what it takes to raise broccoli, for example. And if you look at those things, the costs involved in raising broccoli it's about $7,000 an acre. For corn, it's about 1/10 of that. Those crops are so much less expensive than vegetables. So where do vegetables fit in your diet? It's fine to eat vegetables. Believe me, if there's some room for cheese, there's totally room for kohlrabi. And but the focus of a plant-based diet, the focus of a climate-friendly diet isn't vegetables. It's those other two, grains and fruits.
Right. And I think, and essentially, again, efficiency is the king on this stuff.
And, when you'd say that word and everybody thinks, is Monsanto paying you? Because like the world has sort of divided into two visions of agriculture. And one of them is like this big industrial bad agriculture, and one is this natural, climate-friendly, good agriculture. And efficiency is associated with the bad stuff.
Right. It's like fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, and pesticides.
Especially when you say it like that.
Pesticides. But remember, it's like, fertilizers, they're absolute problems. There are climate impacts. They're usually made from natural gas. They're fossil fuel. They help stuff grow. Pesticides, again, very intense industrial process. They kill pests. And again, I keep banging my spoon on my high chair about is that we are going to need a lot more food with a lot less land. And when you talk about these, lovely organic farms with the red barns and where, all the animals have names instead of numbers, it's very nice, but it takes more land.
I don't hate those farms as much as Mike does.
Well, again, I don't hate them. I hate,
Oh, yes, you do.
Well, I hate what they do to the climate. I hate what they're going to do to people who live in the floodplain in Bangladesh. There's this sense that, like, oh, if you care about the climate, it's this kind of sort of twee, environmentalist thing, as opposed to thinking about food that people eat and, about prices and, kitchen table issues. But, climate hurts people. And soy, the reason that we grow so much of it is because it's like the most efficient vegetable oil. It's
the most efficient plant protein.
Exactly. And the reason we grow so much corn, it's awesome. It's an incredible starch.
Can I do calories per acre? Is that too much?
Yeah, go for it. It's like we can't just stipulate that they're the best.
So there's a metric I have a one-woman crusade to try and make everyone care about, and that's calories per acre. Because we all need about 1 million calories, give or take, every year, and we only have about 1/3 of an acre of cropland globally per person. So you got to grow a lot of food. And other things matter. Protein matters, nutrients matter, but calories really matter. We have to feed people. And so corn, I mean, everybody hates corn because it's been vilified from here to Sunday, but that's because we eat it in like soda. If we ate it in tortillas, it would be fine. And it's 15 million calories per acre, which is huge. The only thing that's up there with that is potatoes.
Interestingly.
Potatoes are also awesome, by the way. Oh, a potato fan over there in the corner.
Interestingly, beef, which provides 3% of our calories.
And uses what percent of our land?
Like 60%.
So the crops that we've been taught to hate, corn and soy, they earn our hatred not from anything inherent about them, but because of how they're used. And so if we're all in on tofu and edamame and polenta and tortillas, that's going to be sort of the ultimate climate diet with a side of vegetables and maybe a little bit of well-raised pork. And now you're talking. And so
we should also remember that that's like in the United States, like 90% of our corn goes either into our fuel tanks, which don't get me started, or it goes into our, high fructose corn syrup or our, or all the other nasty stuff. While in the developing world, people eat their grains. I mean, that's and that's an important source of nutrition, and that's something where, again, not to be a bore about this, but if they had, yeah, that happens all the time. But if they had in the developing world, if they had more fertilizer, if they had more pesticides, if they had better seeds, they could grow more of it, and they would deal with a lot of those hunger problems that you have out there, as well as climate problems. Because remember, that's why they're cutting down trees. So grow more food.
Grains and legumes, they're called row crops, because they are planted and harvested in rows by machines, no backbreaking labor, are a completely different animal from vegetables. Wait, strike that metaphor. They're a completely different crop group from vegetables. And the USDA calls them different things. Vegetables are called specialty crops for a reason. So the backbone of a diet that's healthy for humans and for planet is right there in the row crop range. It's whole grains and legumes and fruits.
Yeah, we like fruits.
We like fruits.
Exactly. They're good for you.
And also,
they're delicious.
And
they grow on
trees.
Trees. We like trees.
We like trees.
Yeah. We dumped all over the idea of storing carbon in the soil because it's really hard to measure, and some of us are skeptical that you can actually get a lot more carbon into the soil. But when you plant a tree, there's a lot of carbon, and you can see it because there's like a tree.
And trees are also perennial, so you don't have to plow up the land. They're a permaculture product, and also many calories per acre on both fruits and tree nuts. So fruits and tree nuts are an excellent part of a climate-friendly diet. And just to prove...
Partly because they're super dense. They are high yield. And why is that? We're sitting here in New York City, to bring it back to where we started, right? Like in New York City, it's very dense with people. they go up in skyscrapers, so they don't have to spread as far out into the exurbs because you have 8-10 million people, on a little island. It's the same with agricultural sprawl. If you have very high density and with a tree, you can use that air above you to grow lots of stuff up there. You can grow more there, and you don't need to sprawl out into the Amazon.
And just to prove that we're not blowing smoke, we actually have some data. And the data source that we tend to rely on for our investigation is a source called Our World in Data, and it's online. You can look it up. It has data you can slice and dice every which way. And I saw the chart, so I do know it exists.
Do we have the next
And
slide?
there
we
is.
go.
And so there you can see.
What's that at the top?
Oh, that looks like beef.
Good.
And so these are the actual numbers of what the climate impact is per 1,000 calories of the food. And you can see that beef tops the charts by a long shot. Chicken and pork are hanging out there at 10% of beef. And you can see that vegetables, there aren't that many vegetables in the database, but brassicas, for example, have a much higher climate impact than apples. And my favorite, legumes, lentils, are way down at the bottom with tree nuts. So if you're going to build a climate-friendly diet, focus on the things on the bottom, use the things on the top sparingly, and Bob's your uncle.
Right, exactly. And remember, beef is so bad that cutting out beef and wasting less food gets you a lot of the way there. If you want to go vegan, that's phenomenal.
It's awesome.
That's the best. Neither one of us are vegans, but that's great. If you're a vegetarian, also great. But if you just cut out beef, like I have, that's generally just as good as being a vegetarian because, as we discussed, the beef is such a problem. And if you go vegetarian, you usually end up eating more dairy. God knows I would with all that pizza.
So that's our rundown, and we would love to take questions. Is there a microphone circulating? It's a small group. I'm sure we could hear you anyway. Nicholas has a microphone. Okay, we've got some questions over here.
2 questions.
Oh, thank you. Hi. This was a really, really wonderful chat.
Thank you.
I learned a lot. I'm Molly from Princeton University, and you haven't mentioned fish at all.
We have not mentioned fish.
And I'm just wondering about some insights there and seafood. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up was, I think it's great that you have this measure where you're looking at CO2 equivalents, and you talked about animal welfare as well, but it seems like maybe there's some other considerations, maybe in terms of biodiversity or overfishing or things like that, and just like how you think about what you want your metric to be.
Well, your second question in some ways answers the first one, because one of the reasons we don't talk about seafood so much, and we do talk about seafood, especially where we talk about aquaculture. Full disclosure, well, I'm a gentleman oyster farmer at this point, but my husband and I have run an oyster farm for 12 years. But fish depends entirely on the fishery. And, usually the carbon impact is in the same ballpark as chicken and pork, but it depends on the fishery. And for me, overfishing is a really big problem. It's a big deal. And so I look at that metric first, not the climate impact.
But fish farming is a really exciting way to make a lot of food with, generally better on land. So using a little land, the ones that are the net pens in the ocean have all kinds of environmental problems, use all kinds of pesticides and antibiotics and gross stuff. But you're starting to see some very cool technologies. I've written about the Atlantic Sapphire company, which is these Norwegian dudes who kind of look like Vikings and talk like tech bros. And they're building the world's largest fish farm back in my neck of the woods at the edge of the Everglades, and they are going to grow essentially half of the U.S. salmon diet on an 80-acre. Now I guess they've expanded, so it'll be a 160-acre tomato farm. So there's just it's difficult. It's new technology. Some people complain about that the fish aren't getting to live their natural life, but it's organic, it's pesticide free, it's antibiotic free, it's microplastic free.
I thought you made fun of organic
well,
pesticide free
if you
stuff.
guys put it in a tank, I got no problem
then you're
with
okay
it, right?
with it?
Right.
You only have a problem with it out in the world.
And because fish are in many ways, right? They don't need as much energy. They don't require as much feed to make a calorie of fillet. Partly because they're in the water, so they're cold-blooded. They're swimming around. They're very efficient, and so if we can make a lot of them without a lot of land, and particularly without feeding them a lot of fish, which has been a big problem with the aquaculture industry, but they're coming up with alternatives. That's, I think, a really promising source of protein.
And your second question also. We say it on the show all the time.
Right.
Food is all trade-offs all the time. There's no one metric that's going to tell you the thing that's best. And it's really hard to balance those things out. So the climate impact isn't the only thing. It's just the thing we came here to talk about.
But guess what's the worst for biodiversity? Yes, cows. Who knew? Yeah, and worse for nutrient pollution. So, not everything's all trade-offs.
I promise no more cows.
It is delicious.
Any other questions? There was another hand over here. There's a hand over there, hand over here.
Hi, my name is Alex. I have two questions. So I just want to clarify, you said bacon's good for the environment, right? Is that what you said? And second question was, so what about these future technologies such as lab-grown meat and vertical farming? Is that a reasonable solution, or is that kind of like nuclear fusion where it's always 50 years away?
Two very different things.
Yay, lab-grown meat. Boo, vertical farming. Again, lab-grown meat isn't quite there yet. You're starting to in Singapore. You can get a couple, and I've eaten a lab-grown chicken nugget. Tasted like chicken. At the time, it cost $90 for that nugget. We're now down probably to single digits, but it's still, that's going to be a while before it's mass market. But it's a very promising technology. Sorry.
That's anybody's
right?
guess.
I don't think it's one of those things that's 5 years away and always will be.
Hey, I kind of do.
No, and you're already going to see. I talked to a company the other day that's making lab-grown fats. And by the way, we shouldn't call it lab-grown because they're not. They're going to be in bioreactor, basically like they're brewing meat, and they're just going to brew the fats and put them in plant-based burgers.
So we'll call them vat-grown meat.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's going to be there. That'll be cost competitive in a few years. Vertical farms, on the other hand, we did a cool episode about it.
Yeah, we did. And so here's the thing about vertical farms, and it was interesting. We had friends over for dinner, and our friend who's a musician, he doesn't traffic in food that much. He says well, vertical farms, those will solve the problem. All right, there's two problems with vertical farms. The first is thank you. Vertical farm are hydroponic farms that grow in buildings where you can stack them up, so you can grow much more food, much more vegetable.
The idea is you're getting rid of the sprawl, right? We're just going to grow vertical instead of horizontal.
But the huge problem with them is that when you have lettuce out in the field, it's turning solar energy into food. When you have lettuce in the vertical farm, it's turning grid energy into food. And if you have a 1 acre greenhouse, a 1 acre vertical farm with 10 layers, if you're going to power that with solar energy, you need 50 acres of solar to do it. Plants take a lot of energy. But the other problem is they're raising fruit vegetables baby arugula. And if nobody had any baby arugula from now until the end of time, everything would be fine. But if there's no bread, there's blood in the streets. And
In fairness, they're pretty good at making weed.
yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah.
High margin crop. It's
Right.
like,
So you need high margin crops to make that work. But somebody tried to grow wheat in one of these things, and it ended up using like $15 million worth of electricity, and it was nuts.
I mean, again, since we're really thinking all the time about how to feed the world without frying the world, these sort of lettuce solutions are great. And if you can get rid of Visalia, or let them grow something more productive in Visalia and Yuma, Arizona, that'll be great. But you're not solving the world's food problem.
And I grow oysters. I'm in favor of luxury products for rich people, but that's what these are.
Yeah. Too much energy, really.
Great talk. Much better than the last people.
You guys were amazing.
Thank you. I
knowledgeable.
was fishing for compliments. Thank you.
Yeah.
And look, half the place left after you finished.
Exactly.
They were just tired. Tomatoes. Please explain, why can I not eat tomatoes anymore? And
You
can I grow tomatoes in my backyard?
No. Oh, that's a great point. Also addressed in my book, To Boldly Grow.
About first-hand food.
If you grow them in your yard, it's probably a pretty good bargain because lots of the costs. If you're growing them from seed and you're not using a lot of amendments and things like that, you'll probably do better. Tomatoes are an issue. A lot of them are grown in hothouses. And actually, I don't actually know why tomatoes are so much worse than some of the other things, and I'm going to get back to you on that one.
Right, but some of those greenhouses where they use the sun,
those are good. Those they're not bad.
Those can be really helpful, but again, it doesn't seem like it's going to work for the crops that feed the world.
Maybe we should do an episode on tomatoes.
I love tomatoes.
I don't want to get into the vertical farm fight, but it very much depends on the power source or how you're supplying your.
We totally get that.
But especially for tomatoes, because they're such a major crop or hothouse crop, so that's one where the vertical farms, or if it's sited in places that either it's solar or whatever, it's a luxury product. But in the efforts to preserve pizza, let's think about ways to do that. But for vertical farms or greenhouses in general, it's so much on the power source because yes, they're all energy intensive.
Right, that's true.
But remember, this is partly we always like. All of this stuff is fungible, right? And this is the same. The same is true with trees. The same is true with meat. It's like it's better if you could power it with by using a big solar array. That's great, but then you should actually just use that solar array to power the grid and grow your lettuce in Visalia.
But the thing is, if you have a green source of power in the grid, I think you want to use it for things that don't have green alternatives. And food has a green alternative. Transportation doesn't.
Right.
Heating your home doesn't. And we're talking about a lot of power.
Yeah. This is one of the reasons.
But no, I agree. When we have a grid that's completely powered from renewables and carbon-free sources, and it's cheap and it's abundant, the math changes. I totally agree with you on that. Yeah.
Let's take one more question.
Okay. We can stay all night.
Hey there, I'm Seth. So first, big fan of baby arugula, so I'll fight you about that later. But I'm also a big fan of chapulín tacos. So you haven't talked about insect protein. Is that an answer?
All right. There aren't very many hills that I'll die on, but the fact that Americans
People
won't
like
eat
die on
insects.
a million hills. Sorry.
Busted. I do not think Americans will eat insects. And it will always be a small niche. And one of the great things about the plant-based meats is that it means you don't have to eat mealworms. And I think that there are places where because the reason we won't eat insects isn't because of anything about the insect, it's a learned disgust response. But just because it's a learned response doesn't mean it's not real. So if we want insects to be part of the solution, first of all, you got to do it in places where people don't have that response. And second, we have to raise a generation of kids here that doesn't have that response. So if you think insects are icky, just feed them to your kids.
Well, and also, I mean, I do think we're going to hopefully feed a lot of insects to our, our
Right.
farm animals and our farmed fish and our pets who don't have that same kind of learned response.
Yeah, they eat vomit.
Exactly.
Do we have other questions? We have time still, don't we? Oh, come on. This is fun.
So I'm an energy nerd, but I also like food.
Okay, good.
But when I think about like the renewable energy, or the decarbonized ideal for like net zero 2050, we know what that looks like. The technology is like not quite there, but like we kind of know how to get there. It all makes sense. You can build something and get a contract for it. That makes a lot of sense. I'm an investor. We like contracts. It like works. Whereas like I'm a vegan-ish and I generally care about what I eat and health and whatever, but I just can't expect everybody else to do that. So, like, what is the actual vision, or like, what's the sort of goal?
Oh, this is such a perfect question, because it's like the reason our podcast exists. Because again,
I know somebody who's writing a book about this. Yeah, I mean, the thing about energy, and I came from writing about energy and climate, and the thing about, like, as everybody in this room and the people who left all know, like decarbonizing the energy is going to be really hard, but we basically know what to do, right? We just gotta, you gotta shift to clean energy and then electrify everything, and it's going to be like, it's going to take a lot of political will, but we know how to do it. To me, the interesting thing about food is that, like, we don't know anything. We don't even
clue.
like, we're just learning what questions to ask, which is kind of, to us, it's sort of, I think, what makes it so exciting. One of the things one of the things we know is that, for example, there are certain foods that we know are bad, and we can see what particular alternatives would be. And gee, wouldn't it be great if the government that has, governments around the world spend $500 billion every year on farm subsidies, and B, have spent in the past, hundreds of billions of dollars on subsidizing renewable energy. Wouldn't it be nice if they threw at least a little bit of money towards some of these alternative proteins that we know can have such an unbelievable impact on reducing demand for the stuff that is, destroying the climate, even if we completely decarbonize the energy system?
And Mike and I don't agree 100% on that, because I'm not sure that government investment is going to make that happen. But I think at the root of your question is also an important distinction between energy and food. And that is that energy is often, or I would say in places, certainly in places like New York, and correct me if I get this wrong, because energy is not my sphere, is something that has a lot of institutional and state involvement, whereas food is the sum of individuals' choices. And yet there are institutions and they can do things. But I think when we talk about this tension between individual action and institutional action, in energy, it tips way over into institutional, because the state has control of the power grid. But in food, I think it tips way over into individual action, because people will only grow and sell the things that people will buy and eat.
Yeah, I mean, this is an area where we disagree, because I just think, I think that's where, just as the government, what we will drive has changed because something awesome that's green came along. And I think, and the government had a lot to do with that. And I think the government can help a lot on the demand side, but also on the supply side. You can take some of those $500 billion a year that governments spend basically just to make rich farmers richer and poor farmers richer, in fairness.
Or poor farmers poorer sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. But, you can use that money, if not, like right now, not even just to promote things that we know will help the climate, because right now we don't even know. We need to find out. We need to be, funding all kinds of demonstration projects and pilot projects like we did with energy. My last book was about the Obama stimulus, which basically threw money against the energy wall to see what would stick. And, basically what stuck was solar and wind and LEDs and energy efficiency and, electric vehicle batteries. But we haven't done that yet with farming. We've just thrown money at farmers and said, farm. So.
And can we keep going, or we burned through our hour? I don't want to overstay our welcome here. We're getting the Metza sign here. One more. You had your hand up earlier.
Oh man, people are like sticking their eyes.
Hi, thank you for your insights. Really appreciate a lot that's been shared. I had a question. I'm curious on your thoughts about the intersection of climate impacts and the environmental justice impacts of certain foods, particularly when you were speaking about pork, just thinking about the localized environmental impacts of industrial farming. It's particularly, as you were mentioning, it's more efficient, but a lot of times there's more harmful emissions and pollutants affecting primarily low-income Black and brown communities. So what are your thoughts on that? And also the intersection with, farm workers' rights, particularly in industrial animal agriculture and in, crops as well, because I just, as an energy nerd and a longtime vegan too, I just think a lot as well about the ethical as well as climate impacts and how that's intersecting with workers' rights, immigrant rights, and just across the supply chain. Thank you so much.
I like to let Mike handle the easy ones. No. So vegan and energy nerd, you're probably as popular as we are. And it's a great question. And it goes back to it's Molly, right? Molly's question about how there are all of these things that happen. And sometimes they're interrelated, but sometimes they're not. And so we're trying to focus on this one thing that we're trying to understand. And, we haven't talked about overfishing. We haven't talked about farm workers. We haven't talked about justice. And all of those things matter. But in a lot of ways, they're not related to the climate impact. They intersect, but and you're right that, for example, the pollution from the animal facilities are affecting mostly poor rural communities in states where those are an issue. And farm workers this has been a real battle. And this actually goes back to one of the problems about vegetables, because if we're going to give farm workers a living wage, it means that those products that are priced out, that some people are priced out of already, are going to be more expensive. So yeah, there's absolutely an intersection, and it's always a trade-off. And what I want us to be able to do is work toward all of those goals. And sometimes they intersect and sometimes they don't. And I know that's a very unsatisfactory answer, but I have found in writing about food for as long as I have, that for me to understand the whole picture, I sort of have to understand one thing at a time. And then slowly the whole picture builds. But just because we're talking about climate doesn't mean it's the only issue on the table.
And I would say that sometimes there isn't a trade-off, right? I mean, first of all, like in the larger picture, like fixing the climate, we all know who's going to be the most affected by climate change, and it's not the rich people in their McMansions. It's disproportionately going to be vulnerable communities, and we sort of just got to policy at the end. But I think your point about the industrial farms, the feedlots, is a really good one. But that's where I look again at this point of, there's got to be a deal. When we look at this from a poly perspective, for years it's just been, the ag guys have a lot of power, so we're going to throw them a lot of money and they can do whatever they want. And hopefully at some point, if that's just going to be the way it is, then we're all screwed. There's nothing to do about it. But we can see that there's an efficiency upside to some of these farming practices that could have a justice downside, and there's a deal there. It's like, hey, how can we help you with your efficiency, but you've got a responsibility too. So we want to we want to improve your yields. We want you to make more food, and that will make you more money, but you've got to do something about your methane, but also about the rivers in North Carolina, and also the people in Black and brown communities who live by those rivers in North Carolina. And that's the sort of, maybe this is the wrong context to say it, but there's such an obvious deal to be had that's one of the reasons, there are a million reasons to be pessimistic about this stuff, because we're 25 years behind energy and we've barely started, and a lot of the ideas out there are bad. But the good news is that there's, these deals are so obvious and so just waiting to be cut, that I'm kind of hopeful that people are going to have common sense and come to the table and say, like, okay, how can we do something that's going to be, eliminate some of these trade-offs and some of these problems.
It's a hard one. It's a very hard one.
Yeah. All right. Let's let
I think we have to let people go.
You are excused.
Thank you.